Welcome to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you're having a great day as you listen to this week's episode. And this week's episode is special because it is the 40th episode of the Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast, which means it's a solo episode. So you are going to be hearing me talk about some of the questions you have sent in. So if you are new to this podcast, welcome. I'm so happy that you are here. If you are a returning listeners, I love you. Thank you so much for keep coming back and listening to my podcast. So if you're new, a little bit about this podcast. It's called Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. So I interview full-time yoga teachers from all over the world and ask them their journey, how they became where they are, what are some challenges they have overcome to be where they are, how they make their full-time career work, what are some logistical stuff, what are different income streams they have. And I also ask about their passions and their dreams for their yoga teaching. I started this podcast because I've been a full-time yoga teacher for about 9 years. And when I first became a yoga teacher, I wanted to be a full-time. And I wanted to know if it was possible, who else was doing it, and what it actually looked like. What was their life like to be a full-time yoga teacher? And it was kind of hard to find people to speak to. It was hard to find full-time yoga teachers. They were out there, but a lot of them were part-time teachers, or they were quote unquote full-time, but they had a support or help from their significant others or partners or their family members. So the pressure of having to make enough income to survive, especially in this expensive LA that I live in California, that pressure wasn't there for some people, some of the full-time yoga teacher, because they didn't have to solely rely on their income, yoga teaching income to survive, because they were sharing their living with somebody else, or they had somebody else to share the cost with. So that's why I created this podcast, because I wanted to know, how is it possible? How do other people do it? And really learn from other full-time yoga teachers who's been doing it longer than I have, or who's been doing it successfully, or they have found this unique career path to be a full-time yoga teacher. So that's what this podcast is about. I interview full-time yoga teachers, but every 10th episode, I decided to do a solo episode because a lot of people wanted to know about me and my life and journeys that I went through to be where I'm at today. So every 10th episode is an opportunity for me to share more about me and my personal stories, and for you to get to know me as well. So before we get started on today's episode, I want to touch on a few announcements. First announcement is that exciting news that I'm going to be co-leading a teacher training next year. It is 200-hour teacher training, Smart Flow teacher training. So it's not just normal 200-hour teacher training. It is a Smart Flow teacher training. And if you know what Smart Flow is, you know how special this is. But if you don't worry. Smart Flow is a method created and developed by my dear teacher, Annie Carpenter. And it's just a very, very intelligent way to think about body and movements and sequencing and yoga. And anybody who goes through 200-hour teacher training by Smart Flow, you will be well equipped to go out in the yoga world and teach yoga. So I'm very honored and excited to be co-teaching this Smart Flow 200-hour teacher training next year, 2025, from February until May, in person in Orange County at a studio called Live Meta in Laguna Niguel. So if you want to learn more about this upcoming teacher training that I'm going to be co-leading with another Smart Flow teacher named Shanti, I'll put the link on the show notes so you can click on it and check out the information about the 200-hour teacher training. So that's my first announcement. The second announcement I would like to make is that I wanted to let you know about the second workshop of the year, or I guess of the module, that I'll be hosting, that I'm not teaching, but I'll be hosting. This workshop is part of my mentorship group, but I am opening up the registration to anyone else who would like to take this training. And this training will be made for yoga teachers specifically. And it's called The Art of Teaching Private Yoga, taught by Brittany. And Brittany, I interviewed almost, I believe, second interview of this podcast. I interviewed Brittany. Brittany and I met during Smart Flow Advanced Training. She is based in New York. She is a yoga therapist. She has a lot of amazing certifications on Pilates as well. And she created this full-time yoga teaching career fully with private yoga. So that is what she specializes. That's what she does day in, day out. And she has really built this successful, amazing, thriving private yoga business in the heart of New York City. So she is the perfect person to be teaching this workshop called The Art of Teaching Private Yoga. So in this workshop, you're going to learn how to support and empower clients in one-on-one yoga sessions. This workshop will give a deeper dive into basic intake, interviewing skills, how to tailor sessions to the needs of client, and how group classes are different than private lessons. We are also going to focus on the importance of meeting clients where they are and yoga teacher skills to help clients feel seen, heard, and honored in their personal yoga journey. In addition, we'll briefly cover logistical issues on private practice, such as scheduling, pricing, intake forms, liability, scope of practice, and when to refer to other practitioner, as well as any other questions you might have about teaching private yoga. I don't know about you, but when I first finished my 200-hour and started teaching yoga, I started teaching group yoga classes. And when I begin to teach private, which I don't teach too many private, right now I teach about 3 privates a week. I realized that, wow, teaching private is completely different than teaching group classes. It requires different set of skills. It's just a different way to think and approach sequencing or just thinking about preparing for a class. And I felt really almost awkward and didn't really know how to approach private yoga in the beginning. Although I think I'm getting better at it now, I think I'm going to have so much to learn from Brittany about how to teach a private yoga and how to become a better private yoga teacher. So whether you are a private yoga teacher or group yoga teacher, or you're just interested in expanding your private yoga business, I think this workshop will be amazing. It's 2 hours long. It'll be November 3rd, Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time, which is 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to learn more, I'll put the link on the show notes for this workshop as well. And this workshop is $35 to register. Okay, enough logistics for now. So this week's episode, somebody recommended that I do a Q&A for this episode. So I have sent a message to my mentees, my people in my mentorship group, if there's any questions you would like me to answer. I also put a question box on Instagram several times to ask if anybody have questions for me to answer on this podcast episode. So I have this list of questions that people have given me that I'm going to go through in this episode today. We'll see if we can get through it all. I hope so. And thank you for everyone who sent in the questions. These questions are all important, and I'm very thankful that you send them in. So let's begin. The first question was, what initially got you into yoga? And how long after did you realize that this path is what you wanted, the path of teaching yoga? I don't know if this person meant path of teaching yoga or path of living yoga, but thank you for the question. On episode 30, which is the last solo episode I did, I really got into super details of my journey of how I became where I am. So I think that episode will answer a lot of these questions. So episode 30, I'll put the link on the show notes. You can take a listen if you really want to know deeper about my yoga journey. But what initially got you into yoga? I think very similar to a lot of people, I was going through a challenging time in my college days. Maybe a lot of us do during that college days, trying to find find out who I am and what I want to do and, dating, relationships. It's just a challenging time in so many ways. And I've been to like LA fitness yoga class initially with my mom, which wasn't a great experience, or it just wasn't a memorable experience. I didn't really enjoy that experience. But later, when I was in college, my sister asked me to join like a 2 weeks intro package at a new studio in the neighborhood. And I remember that was a very helpful mentally because I was in such a stressful, challenging time in my life, especially in a relationship that I was on and off during that time. So I remember practicing yoga helped me feel more grounded, centered, less emotional up and down, and also started to give me more acceptance and love and kindness for myself. So I think that's kind of how I initially got into yoga, asana. How did I realize this was path for me? That's a good question. Since then, I always I was interested in taking a teacher training program. And once I did and started teaching, I just knew that I want to keep pursuing this and not go back to my old job, which my old job was working for a travel company, traveling around all over the world, which was fun, but it wasn't meaningful for me. And I just knew that teaching yoga felt a lot more meaningful and fulfilling. So, yeah, I just kind of kept following my urge and my curiosity. And soon enough, I just knew that this was the path for me. For now, I'm always open to change. Like I may want to shift my career path in the future, and I'm okay with that. But for now, it just feels really aligned. And I think that's a feeling and sensations that I should follow if it feels in alignment to continue following my heart. So that's kind of how and why I got into yoga. And the next question is, what do you love the most about yoga? I think what I love the most about yoga is that I think I became a better person because of it. There's an amazing quote that I share a lot in my yoga class by Krishnamacharya. I'm sure I shared it in the podcast too. Krishnamacharya is one of the OG yoga teacher who's from India and who's no longer alive. But there's this story of his student asking him, how do you know if my yoga practice is getting better? And Krishnamacharya, the teacher, answered by, your yoga practice is getting better, not when your yoga poses gets better, but when your relationship starts to improve. And that is a very powerful quote or message for me because I know that because of me practicing yoga, I am a better person to myself and to people around me. And then that is going to improve the relationships around me. And hopefully that is going to have a ripple effect, that it's going to have more positive impact to the next person and the next person. So that's kind of why I love yoga. I also love that yoga is about finding contentment in where I am in this moment. And this moment is ever changing. So it's constantly teaching me to be flexible and be adaptable. It's constantly teaching me to enjoy the present moment, which is such an important reminder, especially the busy life that we live in. There's so much thing I love about yoga. It's so hard to narrow down to one thing. I just gave you a few, but I'm sure there's so many other things. I love the spirituality. I love the philosophy of it, but I also love the physicality of it too. So I don't know. It's hard to sum up, but great question. Thank you for sending that. Another question is, how did you have the confidence to start your online studio? And, I always was interested in starting some kind of online stuff, but didn't really have confidence or time to start before the pandemic. But once the pandemic started, it took me a while, but I started eventually teaching online. And I eventually started teaching 7-week chakra yoga course. So I decided to make this 7-week course. Every week, we're just going to go over each chakra and talk about chakra and do a yoga practice that's geared around each chakra. And when I first offered that course in the pandemic, I was pleasantly surprised by how many people signed up and registered. And once that 7 week ended or it was about to end, there was a strong urge inside of me that said, keep this momentum going. When the 7 week chakra course ends, don't stop now. There's like this amazing group of people who want to continue practicing with you online. So there was this huge urge and huge message inside of me that says, keep the momentum going. So at the end of the 7 week, I launched my online yoga studio and said, hey, if you want to continue practicing with me, now I have this online yoga studio. This is a monthly membership fee, and you get this included in the membership, and kind of started the online yoga that way. Yeah, that's kind of how I started. And it's still going because there's still enough students who want to continue practicing with me online. And I just love the fact that I have my own online yoga studio, and I get to make decisions about my online studio, and I get to make my online studio be my dream studio in terms of like how I decide to donate every month to a nonprofit, or how I decide to put what style of classes, what time, what date. Like that is all up to me. And I love that. And I love the direct relationship I get to have with students. And I also love the accessibility of it for students and for myself to teach online. But that's kind of how I had the confidence to start my online studio. I just knew I had to keep the momentum going because the chakra course went well. And it's something I always wanted to do. And I just also knew at least at least 5 or 7 people gonna sign up. And I think it's scary to start online yoga studio if you aren't sure if anybody is ever going to sign up. So I think it's good to do like put out a feeler, like ask your audience, your community, your followers, are you interested in taking online yoga classes with me? Are you interested if I start an online studio? Or are you interested if I taught online like 4-week course on this topic? And if there's enough people interested, then maybe start it and then see where it goes. Next question is, would I ever open a brick and mortar yoga studio? I always said no. I worked for so many studios where I just can see and feel the stress of owning a studio, and it's just so much work, and I just didn't feel like that's what I wanted to do. I didn't see myself doing all the things that they are doing. It's a lot of work. Rent is high, managing employees and teachers, and last minute cancellation, and it's a lot. I think I've seen it, and it just doesn't look fun for me. But I do have my online studio, and that's a lot less work and less stress and less overhead cost to run an online studio. So I love that. I think I would be open to opening or being part of brick and mortar yoga studio if it was like a collaborative, almost like a co-op setup, where very similar to Yoga Tree Co-op that I interviewed Ja from, where I think 4 teachers own the studio together, so they can split up the work together, and they have really strong mission that they run their business by. So something like that, I would be interested in being part of it. So all the work and responsibility of running the studio doesn't fall on me. So if I can run it with like 5 or 6 yoga teachers, we all have the same goal, mission, values. We can all put in our strength, that everybody can have a role that utilizes their strength. I think that's really cool to run like a yoga studio co-op, or just like, 3, 4, 5, 6 owners. I know that comes with a lot of meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page, but I think that would be cool to do. And this person asked because she said that I'm very teacher-centered in the way I like to teach and run my mentorship. So how amazing it would be if I could run a yoga studio that was very teacher-centered. And, I do have dreams. I always think about if I ever owned a studio, which I don't know if I ever will because of just so much stress that goes into it. But if I ever owned a studio, it will be teacher-centered studio, because I have been part of so many studios where teachers were not prioritized. maybe money was prioritized or profit was prioritized or a weird agenda was prioritized. And I would love to own a studio where it is teacher-centered model. Teachers are the heart of the studio. Students come for teachers. So I would love to own and run a studio where teachers are valued, teachers are seen and heard, and there's emphasis on continuing education for teachers. So maybe offering monthly continuing education workshop for teachers at the studio. Teachers get a significant discount or almost like free or just maybe just a really significant discount if a guest teacher from another country or state comes to the studio to teach a continuing education training. Teachers can come for free or very low cost. That pays and compensate teachers well, and really have this amazing community. And the studio has to have a huge component of giving back. That would be my dream studio. Like, a percentage of the profit goes to a cause or nonprofit organization, or maybe monthly donation class that goes towards nonprofit, or maybe like community class that recently graduate yoga teachers can have experience to teach. Let's say you charge $5 or $10 for this class and they call it community class. That money will go towards donation towards a nonprofit, something like that. That would be cool. So teacher-centered studio that cares about continuing education for teachers, that cares about teachers' right, well compensated, and yeah, all of that would be my dream. So if you know of a studio like that, let me know. I would love to interview somebody from a studio like that. And if you ever want to open a studio like that with me and maybe like 5 other teachers, I'll be happy to chat with you. But I don't have a brain power or capacity in my schedule to initiate that project. But if somebody will, I'll be happy to be part of it. Okay, so another question was, if I could go anywhere in the world that I haven't been to yet, where would I want to go? I really want to go to Greece. I really want to go to France. I've been to Italy, but I want to go to southern Italy. I would love to go to Morocco. I would love to go to Laos. I would love to go to Solomon Island. Those are the places that I can think of that I haven't been to yet that I really want to go. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones that comes to my head at this moment. The next question was, where would I like to travel to if I were traveling to explore about yoga or yoga training? And this question was super easy for me to answer. Of course, India. India is where I would love to go explore more and stay somewhere for like a month or two and just like really immerse myself in learning yoga. I know there's like Jessica Char's Vini Yoga schools. I would love to go study there. I'm sure there's so much more that I don't even know about. So maybe I'm kind of idealizing India, but India would be such an amazing place to kind of like go there for a month or two, cut off from the rest of the world, and just dedicate to daily practice every single day. Practice, philosophy, workshop, just continue education. That would be really amazing to do. Maybe I will do that someday. Next question was, what are my top 3 trainings that I've taken that I would recommend? And I started making lists in my head, and there's more than top 3, but definitely Annie Carpenter, Smart Flow would be on the top of the list for now, because Smart Flow has just made a huge influence on how I teach. Annie Carpenter, who is the developer of Smart Flow, I just have a huge respect for her and the way she teach and the methodology that she came up with of how to think about movements and teachings and sequencing and cueing. And I just really, really love that. And I almost wish everybody can learn Smart Flow. That would be really cool. Shameless plug. If you or anybody you know want to learn Smart Flow, want to get a really good foundational training in yoga, I am teaching Smart Flow 200-hour teacher training early next year, February to May 2025 in Orange County. The link is on the show notes if you want to check that out. Another one I can think of, and I'm sure my answer is going to be different every time you ask me, but another one that I can think of is Physio Yoga, Three's Physio Yoga training that I was part of last year. That is where physical therapists and yoga teachers who teach this training are certified in both, or they have both qualifications, trying to teach yoga teachers a little bit of knowledge about PT work and how they view human body and how to approach different body types. And that was really eye-opening training for me that I feel like I'm still marinating in the information they've given me. And thank goodness I still have access to their content, so I can always go back and relearn it. And I feel like every time I go back to that content and to relearn, I'll be learning more each time. Another one is Jill Miller. I just finished taking Jill Miller's role model method training, which is myofascial release training to become a myofascial release teacher. And I really want to take her yoga tune-up training. Everybody tells me how great that training is. So right now I'm leaning more towards anatomy, physiology, functional movement training. That's kind of where I want to learn more about. And I feel like Jill Miller has amazing offerings in that field. But definitely other teachers I do recommend is Jason Crandall, Julius Lathater, Joan Hyman, Tiffany Cruikshank from Yoga Medicine. I feel like those are the high caliber, high quality trainings to look into if you want to look into continuing education from amazing teachers with amazing, like high quality information and knowledge. Next question is, would I ever make a meditation training? I don't think so. As of now, I don't feel qualified to teach meditation. And I think of meditation teacher as somebody who's been meditating for years and years and years and years, and who just kind of like are at the next level of consciousness and awareness. And I'm definitely not there. I struggle to have a consistent meditation practice. I try, and yeah, it's something that I would love to do. I've done Vipassana, the 10-day silent meditation. That was, life-changing experience for me that I really want to do again. And yeah, I see and look up to meditation and meditation teachers in high regard that I definitely don't feel qualified to be a meditation teacher. There are so many meditation teacher trainings out there. And you can say the same thing with yoga too. Back in the day, you don't go through a meditation teacher training to become a meditation teacher. You just meditate for so many years, for so much that you start to teach because you become expert in it, or you have so much lived experience of meditation. So you start to teach and share with others. And I'm sure that's how yoga used to be. Like yoga teacher training really wasn't a thing back then. You just practice, and you practice with your teachers for long enough that your teacher gives you a blessing that, okay, you can teach now. So that's kind of how I view meditation. So it just feels wrong for me to teach meditation at this moment. It's something I want to get deeper into, but I have a hard time getting deeper into. Yeah. So that's where I feel about meditation, teaching meditation or teaching meditation training. I don't feel qualified. Next question I have is, what are some weird things that you need to do for your health when teaching a lot of yoga classes? Like, what are some self-care things? And this person said example of Epsom salt or massage. And yes, if you teach a lot, which I do still, and I used to teach more. I used to teach close to 30 classes a week. And now I'm teaching about like 15 to 17 classes a week, which I want to teach a little less than that, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. So what are some things that I do? I make sure I have enough alone time. I'm noticing that I need alone time to unwind after a busy day or a busy few days. Having my own practice, like whether that's, I've been using a lot of myofascial release as my own self-practice lately. So rolling on the balls, meditation, chanting, obviously getting a massage if you can afford to, and if you can get to that often and regularly, I think that would be amazing. But that's why myofascial release balls are amazing, right? Because you can give yourself a massage and you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars to go get a massage from somebody else. So I think I see that as a great self-care practice. Whatever it is that you need to fill up your cups, whether that's spending time like being alone, like me, I think I have to spend some time alone. I like going on walks, and I like having like a deep conversations with like one or two people who's really close to me. That also fills me up. Being in a big group of people is draining for me. So that's not the way I'm going to fill up my cup. But for some people, it is. Like hanging out in a big groups is the way they fill up their cup. So finding what it is that fills up your cup. And I really lately, now that I'm 36, almost going on 37, I'm trying to prioritize sleep. So I try to go to sleep early, get enough sleep as much as I can. I know that's not possible for everyone because of their job, or maybe they have a newborn baby or, baby or kid that you're taking care of. But if you can, I think simple things like make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're eating in a way that is nourishing you, and don't demo and do every single class you teach. I think that's another huge one. If you demo and do everything in every class you teach, of course, you're going to get tired if you teach 15 or 30 classes a week. So making sure you're not demoing everything, but then you're also making sure that you have your own practice, whether that's yoga or meditation, chanting, or myofascial release, rolling on balls. Next question is from a newer yoga teacher. Next set of 4 questions is from a newer yoga teacher, and asks, when can I expect to start being able to quote unquote wing teaching a yoga class without a lesson plan? And I think everybody have a slightly different approach on this, but I don't recommend you wing any class. I think it's important for teachers to come with a plan and an idea of what you're going to teach. And don't get me wrong, I have winged many classes in my life, and I still do sometime. But sometimes I can wing it in a way that is slightly more thought through winging or intelligently wing it. So it takes time. I don't recommend you wing it. Always have some kind of plan, whether like I'm going to work on hip opening today, or I'm going to work on hip strengthening today, or I'm going to work on Bakasana crow pose today. So have a plan, I think, is important, especially as a newer teacher. But as you become more experienced in teaching, for me, I have probably 5 to 10 to 15 sequences in my head that I can kind of pull up and use anytime. I didn't have enough time to prepare the class that I'm going to teach tomorrow, but I can go back into my mental folders and be like, okay, I'm going to use this sequence, work towards this pose, or work towards this action of the body. And then I can kind of come up with sequence in my head right away that way. It's not winging it because it's still an intelligently put together sequence, but I have those sequences ready in my brain. So if you have 5 or 7 sequences like that you can pull up and use without having to spend hours preparing, I think that would be helpful. With anything, repetition is key. That's how you get good at something, is doing it over and over and over again. So just teach. That's all I can say. Just teach. Once you get to 1,000 hours of teaching hours, you're probably going to have a lot of sequences you can fall back on that you can teach, or you can see the room and make adjustment to your teaching and sequencing. But that just takes experience. So you just have to be teaching. It's not really about time, because let's say a person who's teaching once a week for 6 months versus somebody teaching 5 times a week for 6 months, going to have a different pace of improvements. So when can you start to notice some change? You just have to be teaching. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, who knows, depending on how much you've been teaching, how long, how often, and how much are you educating yourself. I think all of those things going to determine the speed of your growth as a yoga teacher. Next question is it normal to feel like you are always doing the same thing? I feel repetitive in each class saying the same thing and poses. I think so. I think it's normal because there are limited number of yoga poses, limited number of yoga asana. And I'm sure that there's even fewer limited number of asana that we tend to do often, right? Like down dog, warrior two, warrior one, chaturanga, up dog. Like there's a few poses or a group of poses that we end up doing a lot in typical classes, and there's fewer, more rare poses we might do. So yes, it is going to be repetitive, and it's normal. It's okay to feel like you're doing the same thing or saying the same cues over and over. Like I said earlier, that's how you get better. And once you start to get kind of bored at the same cues you start to use, that's when you get a little bit more creative about how to say the same thing differently. And sometimes these new ideas come from taking other teachers' yoga classes. Listening to other teachers' cues can give you a great inspirations and ideas to kind of change up your teaching or change up your teaching that is starting to feel repetitive. So take other teachers' classes, get inspiration from others, I think is a good idea. And it is normal. But I can kind of get into deeper, like if your class is focused on shoulders, you could be teaching warrior two in every single class, but depending on what's the focus of my class, I'm going to be cueing different things. Like I'm going to cue the shoulders in detail in warrior two if my class I'm teaching is about shoulder. But then same pose, warrior two, I could teach more in detail about what's happening in the hips and pelvis. And that can be my focus of my cueing that class, because for that class, my focus was pelvis. So I could still teach the same exact pose, but have a different cues that I use depending on what is the intention of the class I'm teaching that day. So that's a little bit more of a deeper, nuanced answer to that. But great question, though. Next question is, do you have tips to get comfortable walking around the room while instructing? I tend to want to stay on my mat and practice with the students. And I think I don't know if it's okay to say that's okay. I went through that phase as a new teacher, is to do everything with the students and stay on my mat and practice everything with my students. So I went through that stage, and I think a lot of newer teachers go through that stage in the beginning of their teaching career. Maybe not all, but a lot of them do. And I think that's okay. Know that that is a phase of your teaching that maybe it's almost like you have to go through to get to the next level. But I think there's a discussion about whether to demo or not to demo. And are you, quote unquote, more advanced teacher if you don't demo? And I don't necessarily believe that, because sometimes demoing is important. And depending on the student base you're teaching, demoing becomes even more important, whether you're teaching beginners or teaching somebody who English is their second language, or teaching somebody where a group of population where hearing is a challenge. Like sometimes demoing is a great thing to do. And some people learn from watching an example. Some people learn well from reading a book. Some people learn well from hearing, like listening to the teacher. And some people learn from watching. So everybody have a different learning style. So I don't like to say this is the one best way to teach. I think there's time to demo, and there's also time not to demo. But what I always do encourage teachers, newer teachers, or teachers who just aren't used to not demoing, is that it's important for you to have a skill to be able to teach without demoing. Learn both. Learn to be able to teach with demoing, learn to be able to teach without demoing. It's important for you to be able to do both, so you can switch back and forth in your teaching, depending on who you're teaching, depending on what part of the class, what time of the class it is. And imagine if you got injured. If you can only teach by demoing, you're not going to be able to teach until you heal from your injury. But if you already have a skill set to be able to teach with and without demoing, if you get injured, you can still teach because you have that skill set already. And when I first learned how to teach without demoing very well is when I got injured. I got injured, I couldn't demo anymore. So it forced me to teach without demoing. And that's how I got good at teaching without demoing. So it took me until I had to learn how to do that. So I think it's it might be a phase that you go through, and that's okay. But I think it's good to make a goal to be able to teach without demoing. I think it's a great skill set to have, and it's a helpful skill set to have to be able to do both. And to be able to do both, you have to learn both ways. So if you can only teach demoing, it's time for you to learn how to teach without demoing. Okay, so I think the question was, any tips on how to get comfortable walking around the room? Choose 1 or 2 poses in the beginning. Choose 1 or 2 poses when you're teaching that you promise yourself that you're going to get up and walk around, that you're not going to do it with them. And the easiest one is like down dog, because down dog, students aren't looking at you anyway. They're looking at the back of the room. They're not looking at you. So what's the point of you doing down dog with them? So down dog is a great one. When you put everybody in down dog, get out of yourself doing a down dog, walk around the room and cue to what you're seeing. Like, oh, can you press down with your inner palms a little bit more? Can you let your heels reach towards the ground a little bit more? Is it possible to find a length in your spine? So cue to what you see in the room, because when you only demo while teaching, that means you're not seeing your students most of the time. And if you're not seeing your students, how do you know if they're understanding your cues? How do you know if your cues are landing with them? How do you know what cue you need to emphasize more than others? So without seeing your students, you're not teaching to your students, you're just teaching the memorized script of sequence you created before you came to class. So you have to adapt your teaching according to what you're seeing in the room. And for you to be able to do that, you have to see your students. And to be able to do that, you cannot demo everything on the mat. You have to be able to get up and walk around or see your students while you're teaching. So the tip is create 1 or 2 poses that okay, every time I put people in down dog and warrior 2, that is when I'm going to walk around the room and couple cues about those poses. And then you go back to your mat. That's your safe spot, it may be. And then do that for a while, and then now start increasing. Okay, now every time students are in tree pose, down dog, tadasana, I'm going to walk around. So, just choose a few poses to begin with, and then keep adding more and more poses that you're going to promise yourself that you're going to get up and walk around. Tips on getting better at memorizing Sanskrit. I think number 1 thing is, if you take a class from a teacher who uses Sanskrit, you're going to learn the Sanskrit names faster than only taking classes from teachers who never use Sanskrit. Otherwise, old school flashcard, maybe draw a stick figure doing a pose on one side, and on the other side, put a Sanskrit name for the pose, or put an English name on one side and then put a Sanskrit name on the other side. Now there's so many flashcards app on your phone that you can get, a book that you can flip through that have both names, and just use it. Maybe give yourself a challenge. This week, I'm going to remember 3 Sanskrit pose names, and I'm going to use them in class. Like, say you have to use them. And the more you use them, then it's going to stick in your brain better. So just start slow, flashcard, or just remember 2 poses in your head this week. Use it in your class, Sanskrit and English name. Keep using it. And then maybe next week you add 2 new poses or 1 new poses that you're going to use. With pronunciation, I would recommend finding podcast or YouTube that pronounces the Sanskrit name for the poses correctly, and try to practice from listening to the native speaker use the word pronunciation. I think it's helpful. And I think it's important to know that, you're probably not going to ever sound like a complete native speaker saying a Sanskrit name. The way I say the pose probably never going to sound like I'm the native speaker either. That's the same thing when I try to speak Spanish. I have an accent. When I speak English, I have an accent because it's not my first language. So that's okay as long as you're trying to make an effort to say it correctly and you're putting in the work of trying to learn how to say it properly. I think that's what's important. And then try to learn those things from native speaker, whether that's on podcast, YouTube channel, or like a real teacher that you sign up for their courses, because then you are learning how to say and pronounce correctly from the source. They are the one who can say it with most correct pronunciation. So learn from them. I think it's a great tip. I recently listened to a podcast episode by Arundhati, and she has a podcast called Let's Talk Yoga, and she is from India, and she had a whole episode where she said every single common yoga poses in English and then in Sanskrit. And I think that's such a great episode to like save on your phone, because you're learning how to say those name of the pose with the pronunciation from the native speaker. So I think that's a great resource. I'll put the link on that on the show notes as well. That is all the questions that I have today that I went over. I hope this was helpful to you. I guess before I say goodbye, I want to say that 200-hour teacher training that I'm going to be co-leading is next year in Orange County. The link is on the show notes if you're interested. It's every other weekend format and in person in Orange County at a studio called Live Meta. I'm co-leading it with Shanti, and it's a smart flow 200-hour teacher training, which is hard to come by. It's not teacher training that you see everywhere. It's a very high quality teacher training that I'm very proud of and also honored to be teaching smart flow teacher training. So if that's something you're interested, check the link on the show notes, or you can always message me. My Instagram is @ReikaYoga. ReikaYoga. My website is www.reikayoga.com. And remember, November 3rd, there's a workshop for yoga teachers called The Art of Teaching Private Yoga with Brittany that I'm very excited to be attending. And that's on Zoom, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. And that's $35 to register. I'll put the link as well on the show notes. And that's it for now. Thank you for listening to my solo episode to celebrate 40th episode of the podcast. It's coming to an end of the year. I have committed to produce once a week episode for the whole year of 2024. And I know I'm going to fulfill that goal that I had. But moving forward from January, I'm still thinking and rethinking about how to move this podcast forward. So if you have any ideas, tips, suggestions about that, I would love to hear from you. So that's it for now. Thank you for listening. And next week, we'll go back to regular format of interviews. Have a great week. Bye.